So meet Oliver. Oliver struggles with speech and is so sensitive to loud sounds and bright lights that going to school, the park, or the supermarket is almost impossible. He's on medication to control seizures and is unlikely to ever finish high school or live independently. He's not a rare case. This is the reality for up to 5% of the global population living with conditions that affect brain development. One of the most common forms of those conditions is Fragile X syndrome. And because we know the genetic cause of Fragile X, I can model it in the lab to understand the mechanisms behind altered brain development and ultimately help not only those with Fragile X, but also others living with similar conditions. So the signaling cells in the brain, or neurons, communicate with each other through electrical signals, and the precise pattern and timing of these electrical signals is what shapes the way you perceive the world around you and the way you learn. And we know that in people like Oliver, this pattern and timing of electrical activity in the brain is changed and that this contributes to symptoms. However, treatments that target neurons directly have not been effective at improving symptoms in people like Oliver. But there's more to the brain than neurons, and they rely on other cells in the brain to support them to maintain their appropriate function. One such type of these supporting cells are oligodendrocytes. And they do this by forming an insulating membrane around neurons, which we call myelin, that acts just like the insulation around the electrical wiring in your house. And this insulation is really important for the appropriate speed and timing of electrical signals in the brain, which we know are altered in people like Oliver. However, we still don't know much how these supporting cells or oligodendrocytes are affected in Fragile X, or how the insulation that they make is affected. So my goal is to identify new therapeutic targets for Fragile X syndrome by studying these cells and the insulation that they make. And my hypothesis is that changes in insulation contribute to the impaired function of neurons in Fragile X syndrome. So in the lab, I use a genetically modified mouse model of Fragile X, and I've taken brain slices from these mice and found that they've got fewer oligodendrocytes, which form less myelin or less of this insulation. However, we still don't know whether this contributes to the altered function of neurons. So to address that gap, I'm testing a drug that we know restores insulation around neurons and is safe for use in people. And I'm assessing whether this improves not just the insulation itself, but also the function of neurons in Fragile X mice. This would provide a cheap and readily available drug with true potential for clinical translation in Fragile X. And by looking beyond the neuron, I'm bringing us closer together to new treatments for Fragile X syndrome and similar conditions, and to improving the lives of people like Oliver. Thank you.